Hey everybody, welcome back to Matic Models. This week we're finishing up the trench base we started last week. Jumping right into it, I removed the barbed wire that we made and I gave it just a base coat of black primer. I probably could have painted these with a brush, might have been easier. And then I just went in with the sponge and I chipped with Vallejo light rust, yellowish rust, and light rubber. And then I covered everything in MIG's standard rust effects. And I probably did 2 or 3 coats to really build up the finish on that. All right, here we are. We're just airbrushing a dark brown over everything on the base, just to tie all the work of the previous steps in last week's video together, so it's one cohesive coat. Now we can go back through and dry brush all of that texture we created with the coffee ground dirt, which in reality was just equal parts of backyard dirt and some grout. And this is going to show all that detail. And that's why we put all that down. So now you can really see it's starting to look like earth and not just a piece of foam with some celluclay on it. I wanted to go back through and really highlight all the wood timbers, and I dry brushed those a little bit more than I would if I wasn't doing upcoming steps, but you're going to see when we use some oils on them later. Now I am using a product I really like and I recommend everyone uses. This is Wilder's Aqualine, and this is the dark earth. It's really hard to find, but if you can, I really recommend picking some of this up. And I'm just going through and I'm getting a little bit on the brush and then going back through with water. And I'm just dipping the brush in water and I'm spreading that paint all around. And what's great about this Aqualine is that it's an acrylic, and so you can thin it with water. You can thin it with water at any time. So once it's dry, I can go back through, and if I want to remove something or change something, I just get some water on my brush and I can get that paint moving again once it's hydrated. So it's really forgiving, and it blends really nicely. And you can see I'm just slathering it on, and I'm not worrying if it gets on the boards because I can just wipe that off. And now we have to start blending the model into the base. So that means using the same earth and dirt pigments that we've been using on the base. So here we're just going through with the Aqualine again, and you can see that I'm creating some streaks just to give it a little bit more of that real world look. And here we are again. Now I left this clip intentionally a little long because I really wanted you to see the process here. I'm just using a much smaller brush, obviously, when I'm working on the model. And this is my water brush. So I used a small brush to apply a little bit of the Aqualine, and I'm just going through now. I'm alternating a wet brush and a dry brush and wiping it off, getting more water, figuring out how it works best. You know, that first larger brush, maybe I didn't have the right pattern I was looking for, and here now I'm just wiping it off, dipping in a little bit of water, and working those streaks around until it looks a little bit more realistic. And again, if I went back right now and wanted to change something, I could, and that's what's so great about these paints. See, just working it out, giving it that really nice streaking effect. And then we're going to come back in with a lighter color, and this is the light mud in the Aqualine. And so this will have the same property, and it will all blend together, but this will give it a much more highlighted look. And you can see when we start dragging it with the larger brushes, it'll really blend in nicely together. Get some water in there to activate it. And then we're just going to start feathering it out. And this, now you can see those streaks really coming together here. I just think it gives it such a nice real world effect, and it's so important to blend the model into any base you're building so it doesn't look like the model's just sitting on top. And that's why I sank the treads down into the dirt as well in the last video. So it really looks like now it's one model instead of a scale model sitting on top of a piece of styrofoam. And now you can see the final result here. I'm really happy with how it looks. And so we have to do the same thing to the ground as well. So we're using the light mud in the Aqualine here, and we're just pulling out those higher details that would have dried out a little bit more. And we're using this to blend the mud that's on the ground, in the trench, and on the treads all together. That's really important to make it all look cohesive. When we do the next steps, you'll see we'll take the contrast down a little bit. But I love working with high contrast and then knocking it down and feathering everything out. I just think it's a little easier to visualize when it's high contrast instead of it all being kind of muddied. And I think it gives it a more realistic look in the end because you can see all those different layers that we've put into it. Because you can still see the dry brushing effect on the dirt that we did in the very beginning. And so now it's all starting to kind of look the same. This is a 25% oil paint, brown oil paint, to 75% thinner. And I'm just getting a nice thick brown coat on there and wiping off what I don't want. So I'm again kind of laying it on thick and then wiping the brush off and pulling away the paint that I don't want. I really like working with paints that I can control. So the Aqualine oil paints. I like the blendability of it, and I like that you can take things away once you've slathered it on there. I just think for blending, it works really nicely. You don't have to be as precise. And you end up with smoother transitions, and I think that's what you see. It makes it look a lot more realistic. And for the trench boards, I really concentrated the oils at the bottom where I can create kind of a false shadow, so it looks like maybe it's wetter or a little deeper. I think it looks a little more realistic to have the darker boards be at the bottom. And this is just, again, an oil wash. And that's with black oil paints. And it's probably, again, 25% oil paint, 75% thinner. And I'm just getting it in those nooks and crannies just to bring out the detail. Because it gets a little lost. We're creating a false shadow here. And just feathering it down into the trench so you can pick up all that detail. And next, because we want the artillery guns to have a matte finish, we're going to hit them with some varnish, some matte varnish, and that's going to tie those decals in as one final step to make sure that those really pop against the muddy ground that we're going to be making with this future floor polish. And we're going to use that as our base coat, our first step in getting that mud to look wet. The next step, we're going to be using Realistic Water by Woodland Scenics. And I'm actually using dry pigments. They recommend using liquid pigments, which I do not have. But these work really well. It took a little extra stirring to make sure it emulsified, but once it was all blended together, it worked really, really nicely. I just used a little pipette and put it down wherever I thought the mud would really accumulate. I ended up actually using this over most of the model. Once I started laying it down, I really liked the look of it. I made a bigger batch and I laid it over just about everywhere. You do want to make sure with this that you pop the bubbles. You can see that when you first lay it down, especially when you're using a pipette, there's a lot of bubbles that naturally just occur. And if you don't pop them, they appear really shiny, but you can go back through and pop them even once it's dry. It doesn't matter when you do it, but it really blends in that muddy look. It really puts the finishing touch for the mud. This would be the mud layer that we've been really working towards. And the next step, the last step, is just to reinstall the barbed wire we painted in the beginning of the video and take a look at the finished product. Thank you so much for watching. Next week we're going to try and tackle some figures, and hopefully you see us then.